Hello, everybody. I got a comment yesterday that reminded me of a real problem that we have within the Deleuze and Guattari online spaces. And I feel like it's actually worth spending the time to call this shit out. I've seen this kind of behavior for 5 years now. It's extremely abusive and it's only used to shut people up. So I want to kind of give just a guideline on how to spot this kind of behavior and why it's wrong, because you will see this kind of stuff, and it is a big part of the reason why people think that Deleuze and Guattari is pretentious or for pretentious people. Okay, but here is an example of such a comment. This was posted on my Heartbound analysis video. They said, I don't know if this is a particularly apt application of schizoanalytic vocabulary. If anything, it comes across as if the aberrant structural cohesion of product design is something to be applauded. I suppose part of it is taking the faciality chapter on its own without the full context of schizoanalytics. Now, this in of itself can be fairly interesting, because a lot of particularly notorious indie games simultaneously break away from the expected modality of design semiotics, but emphasize this perennial aberrant model of thought. And I would say Hardbound, Yeek, and the definitely fall into this category as archaic moralizing parables knee-deep in Freud. There are some excellent indie games in a much smaller spheres that trace a much more successful line of flight to the limit, but those tend to be fairly obscure, which makes sense, since breaking away from an aberrant modality is also to break away from the code that fulfills the capitalist ideals of maximal outreach. How is this person abusing DG? First, they insist that something is wrong because it has structure. Aberrescence is bad, just inherently bad, and rhizomatic is good. That's kind of their main thing here. Why is this wrong? Structure is not actually bad. The problem is actually when structure stays in place. So, for example, it is not wrong to have, psychoanalysis exist. Guattari doesn't hate Freud. He actually really likes Freud. He says in one he says in one paper that Freud should be read more like a modernist novel than like a scientist, and I think that's a really interesting take. He doesn't have a problem with structure, right? He has a problem with how structure is coupled with authority that makes it hard for other structures to emerge. That is repression to Guattari, right? Schizoanalysis is about producing new rupturing possibilities all the time. Producing new things requires structure, reterritorialization, right? So when something deterritorializes, and this is something that if you read anything about what these guys say about deterritorialization, it is every single time they talk about it. There is a subsequent reterritorialization that occurs. Reterritorialization is the introduction of structure. It is essentially construction of structure. This person is just moralizing Deleuze's thoughts instead of building useful tools and weapons. So they're just wasting your time. They're just saying, oh, it's bad because it's aberrant. No, shut up. And this quote from Hanyo Barasim makes it pretty clear that, constructivism is a major part of Guattari's schizoanalytic, ecology. So he says, indeed, the perhaps most fundamental tenet of Guattari's schizoecology, which is a tenet that he never puts into question or abandons, is the notion of constructivism. This notion resonates in many ways his concept of the general mechanism of the world, and in its particular with its concept of an inherently constructive or machinic desire. As Guattari and Deleuze note in A Thousand Plateaus, there is no desire but assembled desire. In ecological terms, from the potentialities provided by a deeply indifferent world, its both differentiated and differentiating creatures are called to construct viable, sustainable modes of living. In Guattari and Deleuze's terminology, the difference between the world as indifferent and as both differentiated and differentiating is that between two paradoxically both identical and differentiated planes, the field of immanence or plane of consistency must be constructed. So I'm not going to read the whole quote. I have the thing in the description with alt text, but like if you like basically what he's saying is that it is essential to construct things. It is essential to have a structure. There's nothing wrong with something having a structure, right? So let's continue. Saying that it is wrong to read and analyze a plateau from the book without interpreting a larger meaning or message. Now, personally, I feel like my interpretation of faciality does actually square away pretty like well with schizoanalytic thinking, and this person's just out of their ass. But I do want to explain that if somebody makes this excuse to you, this is full of shit. Disproven easily by reading the introduction of 1,000 Plateaus. You know, again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this whole thing is him talking about why books can't just be read linearly, and why introducing this sort of binaryism and all this crap into reading is, like, not helpful and shit. It's about how the book is a rhizome, right? It's literally just an attempt to not engage with the presentation. Instead of engaging with the idea that is a faciality machine, something that is present in user interfaces, instead of answering that question, they're just saying, oh, you didn't read enough. You didn't read enough. If they will tell you that you never read enough. It doesn't matter how much you've actually fucking read. There is no way I have not read as much as this person has in terms of Deleuze and Guattari. They're full of shit, right? This behavior is called out by Deleuze and Guattari in What is Philosophy as well. There's a famous quote from there about how Deleuze is saying that these kinds of assholes are completely the worst part of philosophy. All they can do is criticize and produce nothing new. That this person's not producing anything new, and I'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, this is a very common tactic by these kinds of assholes. Don't get hazed. Here's another thing. Appears to be suggesting that it is incorrect or aberrant to use common game design principles or themes. Why is this wrong? There's nothing wrong inherently with using popular or common structures. The issue is when you don't deterritorialize or be critical or think about them. Like, think of, for example, about how, you know, I understand that Undertale is technically an indie game, but, like, Undertale, which is a very popular and successful indie game, subverts a lot of the same tropes that you see in game design for RPGs because it's trying to tell something with that. That's part of what makes it so successful. So really, the goal shouldn't be to emulate these kind of game design principles, but to analyze the faciality machine that is produced and deterritorialize it along its bordering effects, which is exactly what is described in the faciality plateau. The goal, like I said, the goal should be to deterritorialize them. The purpose of the video was to deterritorialize UI design to discourage this exact kind of assumption among game designers watching. Yes, you have to actually have a structure. You have to have a point in order to be able to deterritorialize anything meaningfully. They also seem to imply a direct correlation between between obscurity and, like, the value that is produced by, you know, like, a game in terms of its, like, desiring production or whatever. This is, like, this is really pretentious, but why is this wrong? Avant-garde indie games are not necessarily more of a line of flight than commercial titles. Like, think of all of the obscure indie titles that are extremely derivative in comparison to something like Metal Gear Solid. Yeah, it doesn't really matter necessarily where it comes from. What matters is how it was produced and how the production of those things actually, like, led to how it works. Capitalism transforms all new things into novelties so they can be consumed regardless of how hipster they are. It doesn't matter if it's obscure. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, not very well known. That doesn't make it a line of flight inherently. You have to actually, like, have a position. You can't just be like, oh, I'm different, I'm special. That's why people aren't playing your fucking shitty game. OP is just projecting their item label ass taste. I should read these quotes from Sully Rolnick. Now, Sully Rolnick, unlike this dumbass, is somebody who actually, like, hung out with Felix Guattari and, like, you know, actually, like, still continues to, like, discuss his principles and, like, really, like, you know, has a movement based around them in Brazil. So let's quote her and see what somebody who actually talked to this person thinks. Do not yield to the will to conserve forms of existence, and do not yield to the pressure these forms exert against the potency of life in its drive towards the production of difference, a drive set in motion every time life is suffocated by the forms of the present. You know, like insisting that there's a specific way to read Deleuze and Guattari and like crushing any sort of like innovation in the field because it triggers your hipster ass. On the contrary, seek sustenance in the thin spread of the unstable state until the creating imagination can build a body expression for the virtual futures that demands to be embodied. This follows for the death of agonizing worlds. You know, like the agonizing world that you're producing by being a big stinky bully. Do not interrupt the time corresponding to the creating imagination. Avoid the risk of intruding on the germination of a world. This interruption makes imagination vulnerable to the expropriation by the pimp colonial capitalistic regime, which instrumentalizes life and leads it away from its ethical destiny, bringing embryonic futures into existence. It is through this deviation that the imagination is captured, subjecting itself to the imaginary that this regime seductively imposes upon us. Instead of creating the new, what gives the body to embryonic features, the imagination is reduced to a mere exercise of its creative capacity, dissociated from life and its demands, to produce novelties instead of creating the new. The purpose of this is to multiply the opportunities for the investment of capital and to stimulate the anxiety to consume, thus increasing the accumulation of capital, not just economic capital, but also social and narcissistic capital. So basically what she's saying right here is that when you go around and you like crush other people's worlds and ideas and you're just like whipping your dick out to show how like fucking cool you are and like shutting down other people, you are destroying other worlds. You are destroying those futures. All you're doing when you're saying this is you're just showing people your Steam library. I can't think of anything more fucking capitalistic. Other red flags from dumb assholes like this. This person does not address the thesis directly. What is necessarily wrong with the idea of the faciality machine embedded in user interface? I mean, I'm obviously critical of it. Like, I criticize no Russian within the first 5 minutes of the video. What are you fucking talking about? Tries to flex by using tough-looking language to talk down to you. Like, this person's throwing around words like schizoanalysis and shit. I know that can be really intimidating, but that can also be a red flag that they're full of shit and they're gassing you up. Dismisses your interpretation based on not reading enough. This is just an endless cycle. Do not fall for their smokescreen. There is no fucking way that this person has actually read more Deleuze and Guattari and related works than I have, because this is literally like my fucking life now. And, you know, I will admit that I am not like the best reader all the time. I have, you know, significant reading disability. But at the same time, like, I spend so much fucking time focusing on this, right? Now, that doesn't mean that I can't be wrong, but it does mean that, you know, like, it doesn't matter how much you read, these people are gonna still say this stupid shit. This person probably hasn't changed their opinion on Deleuze in 5 fucking years. Like, it's honestly weird and archaic seeing this kind of shit. So, anyways, I just wanted to inform my community, especially as it's growing and there's a lot more people who are getting involved who may not necessarily understand this theory, to be aware of these assholes and to, you know, shut it down whenever you fucking see it. Thank you.